So after Liam's show, I did a big another group exhibition. This one maybe to sort of solve some of the problems of the rock show and sort of like, purge my sins of the rock show, and doing something a bit more academic and studious, looking at the artist studio and really kind of looking at how artists right now are like not only kind of focusing on the studio but sort of depicting the studio in their work, but also to really kind of engage with how the studio has been presented throughout the years and how artists are kind of updating this tradition of representing the artist studio, whether it be documentary images of like Lee Bonteque in her studio up in the upper left-hand corner, or the great painting by Courbet from the mid-19th century, kind of looking at the artist's life and the people in his life in the studio sort of situation, or even good old Maud Lebowski from the Big Lebowski, and how popular culture has framed our understanding of what an artist is by putting the artist in the studio. I've been watching a lot of Friday Night Lights lately on Netflix, and like, I don't know if you watched it, but by the fourth season, one of the characters is like working in an artist studio, and the first image you see of the artist is like him and grubby, like like tidy whities, or not quite so tidy whities anymore. And he's a crazy artist, and he's like welding all this stuff, and it's just like great. Artists aren't professionals. Artists don't like they're wild and crazy and drink and don't maintain relationships, and it's all just total bullshit. But that's the way that they're presented. That's the way that I'm sorry, but that's the way the pop culture thinks of you guys and us. It sucks. And so this was like intended to kind of be a shift in changing people's perceptions of how the studio is represented, how artists self-represent the studio. And so William Pentridge, this was kind of the highlight / centerpiece of the show, 9 video projections of animated films that he created where all of these sort of magical things would happen through his very rudimentary use of animation. Almost like that scene in Mary Poppins where everything starts to kind of fall into place. You see him like, having all these torn pieces of paper kind of magically reappear into his hands. Seeing him kind of drawing his own portrait, and then the portrait seeming almost to draw him in return. Amanda Rossho, artist I actually kind of want to continue working with. These are 9, these are kind of detail images of an installation where she had 9, her entire studio in LA was sort of in this open warehouse space, so she had excised the walls from her studio so that they became these sculptural objects, but also became these collaged objects as well. Ryan Gander, interesting young English conceptual artist. There were 100 crystal balls on the floor that sort of, when you looked in the crystal ball, it had this like kind of sheet of paper, and the piece was titled "A Sheet of Paper as It Fell from the Floor as I Was Going to Make a Drawing," or something like that. Sorry, I'm like a little sketchy. And it really was this sort of moment that happened in his studio where he noticed this beautiful sort of floating, cascading sheet of paper, and how to recreate that, how to reconstruct that moment sculpturally. And so what you saw in the gallery were these 3 big photostats on the wall that show you how the crystal balls were made. His studio assistant Felix, kind of hanging, suspending these sheets of paper from the ceiling. They'd be photographed and then turned into a computer file, and the computer file would be used to kind of laser etch the image of the paper into the crystal balls. Peter Fishley and David Weiss, artists, really iconic artists who are based in Zurich, in Switzerland. And these are 106 cast polyurethane objects that they painstakingly repainted to replicate their studio in Zurich. You see the little kids' boots and all these other kind of effects. And so, really kind of taking the studio process and making it work to basically reconstruct the studio process. What I loved about this piece wasn't, it was kind of, you couldn't enter it because it's really, really super fragile. But nobody told me that we were, instead of using like this kind of like silver rope or chain, that they loved the idea of having this blue tape that we were using to kind of keep people out during the installation. Nobody wound up telling me, so I was like freaking out the night of the opening, and they're like, no, that's what they wanted. It's like, thanks. Hello, curator. And then again, I wanted a performative. If you do a show about the artist studio, like to not have an artist actually living and working in the space seems really dopey. And so I invited this artist from Mumbai, India, Nikhil Chopra, whose practice is really about kind of reconstructing, performatively reconstructing these various figures from Indian culture, the last of which is meant to represent his paternal grandfather, who really started out as an artist but had to kind of shift his role into that of a proper businessman, and so he's kind of maybe carrying on his father's legacy. And so he lived in the space for 2 days, kind of covering the wall with this charcoal drawing and going through these various permutations, wearing this sort of traditional loincloth in the first permutation, and then changing into this much more feminine black sort of figure. He liked the way that in studio portraits of artists that you usually have the artist set off from like the studio, but here he wanted to kind of blend in, to sort of alter that and change that, and then finally as this sort of 19th century dandy. And the show happened, oh my god, it was like a year ago, in Chicago, which, you know, if you've been paying attention to the weather, it wasn't so dissimilar. It was actually another blizzard, and so he actually walked out and walked back to his hotel. He walked out very slowly and methodically in the building. Once he got outside, I'd never seen anyone move that fast. So that's my last thing. That'll open in a couple of weeks, and so on to what I'm going to be doing here, or what I might be doing here, or what I won't be doing here. But what I'm thinking about doing here at the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, there it is, lovely glass, concrete, aluminum mesh space. And I first began to kind of interface with the CAM on a very small scale, looking at our Front Room series. For those of you not familiar, it's about 12 by 23 foot space, a small little space where we invite artists of mostly a very emerging kind of capacity from around the world to do very cheap, very quick shows in that space, to kind of keep us active, to kind of keep our shows, which are up for about 4 months, to kind of keep people, you know, kind of coming back and checking in and having something new while people are revisiting these older shows. So my first engagement with the space is bringing an artist from Chicago who I'd always really admired, a young artist who teaches at Columbia College named John Opera. And John is really interested in photography as a natural process and also how photography captures natural phenomenon. But he's paired with this artist, Matt Sheridan Smith, who's kind of a New York conceptual object maker, in a kind of way to sort of set up a dialogue between the two. But John's work is really this series of works that we're showing are called anthotypes. And so in the mid-19th century, before they realized that silver gelatin prints only took a few hours to develop, there were experiments made to kind of use fruit and vegetable pigments and the way that they responded to light on a piece of on a prepared paper to make photographic images. And so John has kind of resurrected this process. It takes actually about 3 weeks for one of these pieces to develop, and actually he has no idea if they're going to like just completely fade away after a certain point. So, you know, kind of going back into history, but making this still very, photographically experimental work in the present day. Margaret Salmon, an artist that I saw at the Frieze Art Fair in London, British, actually American filmmaker living in London, who creates these really poetic and evocative works. This is a piece called Everything That Rises Must Converge. It shares a title with a short story by the Southern author Flannery O'Connor. That story, I think, really kind of reflects issues of difference and racism in the Deep South in the 60s. This piece is actually, in a way, kind of explores very different, much more benign elements of difference, showing these two little girls going through virtually the same kind of day, but being shot with different kinds of stock film, and just meditating on these slight differences of where they're at, their physical features, and so pairing these things that look very similar, but kind of really emphasizing these subtle differences between them.